Alright, mateys, and welcome to the first episode of the Mana Pirate. Today we'll be doing a deck tech of one of my favorite generals, and that is Omnath, Locus, and Mana. Omnath is a 1-1 for 2 colorless and a green. He has green mana, doesn't empty from your mana pool as steps and phases end. Omnath, Locus, and Mana also gets +1/+1 for each green mana in your mana pool. So basically, you can always keep your green mana. The whole point of this deck, get Omnath out early, build up a lot of green mana, cast or cheat in big creatures, and stomp opponents' faces in. We have 31 basic lands in this deck, followed by a Castle Garenbrig. Enters battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. Tap to add 1 green, or 2 colorless, 2 green. Tap it, add 6 green mana. Spend this mana to only cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. If you're going to store it on Omnath, Locus, and Mana, make sure you keep it separate because it will remember it can only be spent on creatures. Then we have a Mosswood Bridge. It's our hideaway land. This helps with cheating in creatures. It comes into play tapped. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library and remove one of them from the game face down. This land will tap to add 1 green, or 1 green tap it. You may play the removed card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. Next we have Nymphos Shrine to Nyx, obviously a huge staple in any monocolor deck. It has tap, add 1 color to your mana pool, or 2 colors, tap, choose a color, we're going to choose green. Add to your mana pool an amount of green of that color equal to your devotion to that color. Huge ramp card. Next we have Rogue's Passage. It is tapped, add 1 color to your mana pool, or 4 colors, tap, target creature is unblockable this turn. Since we play Commander, 21 Commander damage from Omnath, Locus, and Mana is going to knock a player out of the game. It's a good way to knock out somebody pretty easily. Lastly, we have Dryad Arbor. It is a creature, it's 0 CMC, it's going to come into play, even though it can't tap for mana, it just takes the slot of a land. It's a good card early on. Next we have Sorceries and Instances. We're going to start off with See the Unwritten. For 4 colors, 2 green, sorcery, reveal the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest into your graveyard. As long as we control a creature with power 4 or greater though, we may take 2 of those creatures out of the top 8 and put them on the battlefield instead. Next we have Natural Order, 2 colors, 2 green. Sacrifice a green creature as you cast a spell, so even if it gets countered, you're still losing the green creature. Search your library for a green creature card, put it in the player's just played, shuffle your library afterwards. Next we have Tooth and Nail, obviously a huge combo piece. 5 colors, 2 green, choose one, unless you pay the entwined cost, then we get to do both. But search your library for up to 2 creature cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library afterwards. Or put up to 2 creature cards from your hand into play. Huge combo piece. Next we have Genesis Wave. X, green, green, green. Reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of permanents. Notice how it says permanents, not just creatures, with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then put all cards revealed this way that were not put on the battlefield into your graveyard. Next we have Green Sun Zenith. X, 1 green, another sorcery. Search your library for a green creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Shuffle Green Sun Zenith into its owner's library. You can do this as long as the spell is not countered. Next we have Finale of Devastation. Huge, huge, huge game winner. X, green, green, search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, then put it on the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is 10 or more though, creatures you control also get plus X and gain haste until the end of turn. So most of the time you're going to want to save up till you have at least 10 to spend on X. Finally, we have Savala Stampede, where you can get a little bit political. 4 colors, 2 green, Consul's Dilemma. Starting with you, each player votes for wild or free. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card for each wild vote. Put those creature cards onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest into your library. You may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield for each free vote. Again, notice how it says permanent card from your hand, not just creatures. Normally don't want to cast this until you have a full grip though, just so that way you don't get stuck, everybody just voting from your hand. Lastly, our only instant in the whole deck, Court of Calling. X, green, 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 convoke. So the more creatures you have on the battlefield untapped, you can tap them to add extra mana into X. Search your library for a creature card with a converted mana cost X or less and put it in the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Next, we're going to move on to some of our enchantments. We're going to start off on our ramp enchantments. We have Wild Growth for 1 green, enchant target land. Wild Growth adds 1 green to your mana pool whenever target land is tapped for mana. Next, we have Utopial Sprawl, 1 green again, but this time you can only enchant a forest, which we have plenty of. When it comes into play, you're going to choose a color, probably green. Whenever enchanted forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of the chosen color to his or her mana pool. Now for a little bit more expensive ones, Mana Reflection. 4 colors, 2 green. If you tap a permanent for mana, any permanent for mana, it produces twice as much of that mana instead. Lastly, we have Zendikar Resurgent for 5 colors, 2 green. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. We're going to be casting quite a few creature spells that will help us with our drawing late game. Now for our other enchantments. Sylvan Library, 1 colorless, 1 green. Basically reads, draw up to 2 extra cards during your draw phase. You may pay 4 life for each of those cards extra drawn to keep them into your hand, and then only do this at the beginning of your draw phase. Next we have Guardian Project, 3 colorless, 1 green. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, and if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Since this is EDH, we only have 1 of every card. So basically, cast a creature, draw a card. Next we have Garruk's Uprising. 2 colorless, 1 green. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. This is a big plus. Omnath itself does not have trample. So giving him trample when he gets big, it's going to help you win the game. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Next we have Concordant Crossroads. This is 1 green and it gives every creature on the battlefield haste. Some may ask, well, why do I want my opponents to have haste? Well, normally you're playing out bigger creatures to where even if they have haste, they're not going to be attacking you. Next we have Looking Predators. This is a huge piece with cheating out our big creatures. 4 colorless, 2 green. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put that card on the bottom of your library. You do not have to put it on the bottom of your library. That is completely up to you. Now, moving into our artifacts. We have Doubling Cube. 2 colorless, 3, tap it, double the amount of each type of mana in your mana pool. This is going to make Omnath huge and give you plenty of mana to cast any big creatures you have in your hand. Next we have the obvious staple of Soul Ring. It helps late game for extra mana and also to get Omnath out early. Next we have Quicksilver Amulet. 4 colors to cast it, 4 colors, tap it, put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Again, cheating out big creatures, it's a big plus, get that extra swing in. Next, the Great Hinge. 7 colors, 2 green. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Get Omnath up to 8 or 9, cast it for only 2 green, problem solved. Tap to add 2 green and gain 2 life. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card, making the big creatures even bigger. Cage Sun is next with 6 colorless mana. As it enters the battlefield, choose a color. probably want to choose green. Creatures you control the chosen color get +1/+1. Whenever a land's ability adds one or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add one additional mana of that color to your mana pool. So it's ramping you, plus making your creatures a little bit bigger. Next we have Sword of the Amethyst. 2 colors to cast it, 2 colors to equip it to a creature. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. And whenever the equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land, a basic forest, and put it on the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. Every time you swing with the equipped creature, you're ramping a little bit more, making Omnath a little bit bigger the next turn. It's a big plus. Now on to the Planeswalkers. Starting out we have Nissa, who shakes the world. 3 colorless and 2 green, coming in with 5 loyalty. She has, whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional 1. That's just a static ability, so it adds a good little bit of ramp. The +1, put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. Untap it. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste, and it's still a land. Her ultimate at -8, you get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible. Search your library for any number of forest cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. Next we have Vivian Reed for 3 colorless and 2 green, coming in at 5 loyalty. +1, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card or a land card from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. -3 is a good little bit of spot removal with destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. Lastly, her alt at -8, you get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2 and have vigilance, trample, and indestructible. Normally by the time you get there, you'll win in that turn. Next we have Garruk Wildspeaker. For 2 colorless and 2 green, Garruk comes in with 3 loyalty, +1, untap 2 target lands. -1, put a 3/3 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. Sometimes that's useful just to have an extra blocker. -4, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample. It's a little extra buff and a lot more damage. Next we have Nissa Worldwaker. 3 colorless, 2 green, for 3 loyalty coming in. +1, target land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with trample. It's still a land. Next we have +1 for untap up to 4 target forests. That's a lot of extra mana. Lastly, her alt at -7, search your library for any number of basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Those lands become 4/4 elemental creatures with trample. They're still lands. Notice the lands do not come into play tapped, but since they come in as creatures, they cannot be tapped for mana or swing. Next we have Garruk Color of Beasts. 4 colors, 2 green, coming in with 4 loyalty. +1, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest in the bottom in any order. This is a good little bit of card draw, especially if you get lucky and you have a bunch of creatures on top. -3, you may put a green creature from your hand onto the battlefield. Again, cheating in creatures is part of this game plan. Lastly, his alt at -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a creature card, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle your library. Alright, so now on to the creatures. First up, we're going to have Mana Dorks. The top 5 are all 1-drop Mana Dorks. It's going to help us get Omnath out early. We got Birds of Paradise, Lane War Elves, Arbor Elf, Elvish Mystic, and Finhorn Elves. These are all 1-drops that will tap to add either 1 green mana or untap target forest. Below them, we have the other 5 bigger guys that's going to help us ramp. We have Nyxbloom Ancient, 4 colors, 3 green for a 5/5 with trample. It has, if you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. That's a good bit of mana. Next we have Zavala Heart of the Wilds. 1 colorless, 2 green for a 2/3. She has, whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card, if the power is greater than each other creature's power. Sometimes if you geared it down too early, other people may benefit from that, but normally we're the one benefiting the most from it. She also has 1 green, tap, add X mana in any color combination to your mana pool where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Normally we're going to look at Omnath, he's going to be our biggest creature, and add a bunch of mana to him. Next we have Seaborn Muse. 3 colorless, 2 green for 2/4. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. She's a huge staple in green for a reason. Next we have Goreclaw, Terror of Calcisma. 4/3. Creature spells you control with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. A little bit of ramp. Whenever Goreclaw attacks, each creature you control gets with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample. Main things, remember, it has to be power 4 or greater to get the +1/+1 and trample. Lastly, we have Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger. 6 colorless and 2 green for a 7/6 with trample. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Locking down your opponent's mana sources will help you get to a win even quicker. Now on to our creatures with a little bit of spot removal attached to them. Start off with Reclamation Sage, 2 colorless and a green for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Next we have Terestodon, 6 colorless and 2 green for a 9/9. Enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into the graveyard this way, its controller puts a 3/3 green elephant creature token onto the battlefield. Then we have Bane of Progress, 4 colorless and 2 green for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Put a +1/+1 counter on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. Then we have Woodfall Primus, 5 colorless and 3 green for a 6/6 with Trample and Persist. Persist reads, when this creature dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. When Woodfall Primus enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent. So you cast him, he destroys a permanent, he dies, comes back with a -1/-1 counter on it, and destroys something else. Next we have Acidic Slime, 3 colorless and 2 green for a 2/2 with Death Touch. When Acidic Slime enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. Next we have Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, 11 colorless mana for a 10/10. When you cast Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, destroy target permanent, any permanent. Has Indestructible and Annihilator 4. Annihilator 4 means whenever this creature attacks, defending player sacrifices 4 permanents. When Ulamog is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. It's a really good anti-mill card. Next we have Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger coming in with 10 colorless mana to cast for a 10/10. When you cast Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, exile any 2 target permanents. Also has Indestructible, and whenever Ulamog attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. Now let's move on to the creatures that have card draw and some of our win cons. Start off the card draw with Soul of the Harvest, 4 colorless and 2 green for a 6/6 with Trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield, you don't have to cast it. Under your control, you may draw a card. Next we have Beast Whisperer, 2 colorless and 2 green for a 2/3. This one says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Then we have Regal Force for 4 colorless and 3 green for a 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each green creature you control. I've drawn almost my entire deck before with this. Next we have Kozilek, Butcher of Truth for 10 colorless mana as a 12/12. When you cast it, draw 4 cards. Has Annihilator 4, and when it enters the graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. Now for some of our win cons. Of course, we have Craterhoof Behemoth. What deck is complete without the good old Craterhoof and a bunch of creatures? Craterhoof reads 5 colorless and 3 green for a 5/5 with haste. Whenever it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get trample and +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Then we have Siege Behemoth, 5 colorless, 2 green for a 7/4 and hexproof. As long as Siege Behemoth is attacking, for each creature you control, you may have that creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. It's a good sneaky way to kill somebody with commander damage. Next we have Naila, God of the Hunt, for 3 colorless and a green, 6/6 indestructible. As long as your devotion to green is less than 5, Naila is not a creature. Other creatures you have trample, and for 3 colors and a green, target creature gets +2/+2 until the end of turn. This is really good if somebody's low on health. You have enough creatures to swing at them. They block Omnath. Omnath takes all the mana, pumps them in Naila, and make one creature they did not block ungodly big. Next we have Thunderfoot Baloth. 4 colorless and 2 green, has trample, it's a 5/5, and it has lieutenant. So, as long as you control your commander, Thunderfoot Baloth gets +2/+2, and other creatures you control get +2/+2 and have trample. Then, last but not least, we have Pathbreaker Ibex. 4 colorless, 2 green for a 3/3. Whenever Pathbreaker Ibex attacks, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Basically take your biggest creature and make all of your other creatures just as big, if not bigger. And lastly, we come into our last few little creatures. We have Artisan of Kozilek for 9 colorless. He's a 10/9 with Annihilator of 2. When you cast it, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Our creatures are going to die. This is a good way to bring them back. Vigor, 3 colorless and 3 green for a 6/6 with trample. If damage would be dealt to a creature you control other than Vigor, prevent that damage. Put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each one damage prevented this way. So whenever you assign one of your creatures to block, they're just going to keep getting bigger. When Vigor is put into your graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. Next we have Hornet Queen, 4 colorless and 3 green for a 2/2 flying Death Touch. When Hornet Queen enters the battlefield though, you create 4 1/1 green insect creature tokens with flying and Death Touch onto the battlefield. Then we have It That Betrays for 12 colorless mana. It's an 11/11 with Annihilator of 2. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. So hopefully you can swing with It That Betrays and get at least 2 decent permanents back. Elvish Piper is next. She is a 3 colorless, 1 green, 1/1, and has 1 green tap. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Good little way to cheat out big creatures. Then we have Eternal Witness for 1 colorless and 2 green. She is a 2/1. When it comes into the battlefield, you may return any target card from your graveyard to your hand. And then Avenger of Zendikar, 5 colorless and 2 green for a 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land you control. Then it has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. He also combos really well with Craterfoot Behemoth. Next we have Mana Gorger Hydra. 2 colorless and a green for a 1/1 trample. Whenever a player, any player, casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. This thing can get really out of control. Next we have Rampaging Baloth. 4 colorless and 2 green, 6/6 trample, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a 4/4 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. Alright guys, so that is it for this deck tech. Let me know what you think. Let me know what other cards you think should be in this deck or needs to come out in the comment section below. Thank you, and be safe on your voyages.